Hello, everyone, and hello, Jelaine. It's so great to have you today for this conversation. We've spoken with you a few times before about people operations, about the people and talent side of things, how to make sense of all of it. Me coming with my experience as an organizational psychologist, as a talent management consultant. It's always really interesting to hear from someone with your expertise in people operations and really making sure that people out there on the front line of every business are doing their best. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. Thanks very much, 𝗕𝗲𝗀. It's exciting to be on and yeah, have a conversation, certainly with some of the ones we've had going down a little rabbit hole. So I'm really excited today.
And can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, please?
My name's 𝗕𝗂𝗀 𝗘𝗅, not easily readable. I'm co-founder at Brilliant and Human. And essentially what I do is help people work better together. And I'm really focused on generally the people that are the front line of companies, so customer service, project management, and a lot of the operational and admin side of the business. I love how people work together, but also how you get the best out of people. And often that's just with a bit of structure, a bit of process, and how they work with the tools. I've also been working remotely for 16 years. So a lot of what I do is how do people work better when they're not sitting in an office together, and bringing that expertise as well, which obviously is a bit more relevant now than it was this time last year. But a lot of it is all about intention and being intentional with what you do. And in the end, having people that you trust and that love working with you, doing interesting work with people you love is ultimately the pinnacle of most business. So that's what I try and achieve.
Thank you, Jelaine. And as for me, my name is 𝗕𝗲𝗀 𝗀. I'm the founder and director at Business Purpose. My background is in organizational psychology and people analytics and coaching. And in my approach, I really focus on making sure that organizations, business leaders can make data-powered decisions, analytics-powered decisions to make a difference for the experience and the engagement of their people through effective coaching, training, communication solutions, and really bring the best of data, psychology, and human-centered approach to work. Jelaine, really looking forward to our chat today. And just to begin, so something that's very relevant for both your expertise as a people operations expert and for me as this analytics consultant and business psychologist is the question of metrics, question of how do we analyze some of the more complex things like communication, performance, their effectiveness, and perhaps how does the importance of that, how do the metrics change in this new normal, the buzzword, in this new world that we live in?
I think what's interesting for me is I think there's the elements of, you can't manage what you don't measure. So there's that kind of supposed like truth of that. And also in this kind of world that we live in, we often measure what we can, not what we should. And I think people, so certainly in the people side of things, it's a lot of intangible stuff. And I mean, you have to wrangle with this every single day, but a lot of what's good about a company with its people and how people are working, really hard to measure. But HR teams are set up to kind of prove their worth and show that they are delivering certain things. And sometimes the only thing you can do is measure certain things. And it's that unintended consequences I often see is like we're measuring this because we can, and then you have the unintended consequences of those measurements. I think one of the conversations we had early on was a question was posed of, is there a software tool that can measure how people are feeling at the start and the end of each meeting? And my immediate thought was, what were you going to do with the data? If you've got a data tool that people just kind of vote on, where does that data go? What's it used for? Rather than a people manager or a team manager saying, how does everyone feel at the start? And how does everyone feel at the end? And managing that feeling in real time. You don't need the data. That's just a human interaction. And so I think that's the challenge that we face is there are some things that we'd love to measure, but we can't. and we find different ways, but also trying to fit everyone into a box and measuring things because we can really does give us some unintended consequences. And data, we just get bombarded with data. And so a lot of what I look at is really, what do you need to measure? What are you trying to manage? And sometimes, again, similar to probably approach you take, is sometimes you need to benchmark where you are. And when you go and help a business, you need to start off with something. So you need to say, right, this is where you are, where are we heading? And for me, metrics is much more trends. It's not targets and goals. It's, are we trending in the right direction? But I think the main thing, and again, this is the thing that I struggle with, is what questions are you asking? What data are you pulling? And is it meaningful for the people who are working in that business and for the business itself? And I know that some of the things you do, like, what questions do you even ask to get some of this data that will help you improve whatever it is you're doing? So that often is my biggest question, is like, what do we need to find out before we even start?
Yeah, and Ghislaine, something that you said, we measure what we can, not what we should. Absolutely, I really like that. It's like sometimes, okay, so there are organizations that don't measure anything. They're at the point where they don't take the metrics that they should be taking, and they really should consider using more analytics for their business. Now, there are other organizations that have heard consultants going on forever about the importance of metrics and how this can really make a difference for longer term business survival, but they don't know what to measure, and they just think, okay, let's measure something. Let's like get all of this data. Like let's have our employees like wear this little thing on their wristwatch, and we're going to say like, how happy do they feel, and that's all sounds like nice and fun, and it gives the illusion of action, the illusion of change and doing something meaningful-ish, but it doesn't really give the desired impact, and sometimes no impact. And most often what happens is that people just become rather cynical about those measurements, because those are done in the name of employee engagement, employee experience and well-being and culture, all of those very noble, truly important causes for a business. But how those are implemented is a different thing. And something that I love repeating when I talk about people analytics and data is that to make quality decisions, we need quality data. Just having lots of data doesn't give us anything. It can have counterproductive, misleading effects. What we need is to be asking those questions, knowing how to word our questions in the most effective way, knowing how to make sure that we're not asking and not trying to measure several constructs in a single question, or making sure that we know that if it's an organization level, we're going to go for an employee survey. If we need a bit more data, we're going to collect it through comments, maybe through focus groups, through other means. But knowing what's the right time to collect that data, and knowing how to decide how we should measure something, that's really important. That's key. And I think something that we've discussed with you, Ghislaine, is the question of what sort of metrics do we need for this new world. Employee engagement, experience, managerial effectiveness, those things have been around for a while. I believe that they still will be important. As long as they're measured correctly, they are sort of the universal constructs, sort of, that are really important for measuring business performance through how well its people are doing. But something that's going to be a bit more important right now is understanding how does business reply to challenging events, how prepared are its people, its managers, its leaders for future shocks through having to operate when it's not business as usual. And those things are incredibly important. And I guess a question back to you, Ghislaine, is how can organizations structure their restructure, maybe patch up, I don't know, their people operations better in this different environment?
So I think the main thing is going back to, the important things of culture and efficiency and effectiveness. And you can do lots of surveys and you can say, yes, I'm engaged, and yes, and those kind of things, you could do them regularly, you can feed back. But a lot of those kind of elements, if you don't do them right, you're not, again, going back to that point of, it has to be quality data. And the challenge is there's a lot of mood and people engagement is very ephemeral. People have a good day, a bad day, but also it's kind of intangible. So a lot of what you get is free form fields and language that you can't put into numbers. And so that's always a challenge. And so actually often how I put that together is this should not be done at an organizational level. This should be done at a team level, so that you get your team managers to ask certain questions and certain criteria, but you have the regular update. So for me, some of the metrics is to make sure that the people managers are sitting down with their team weekly for 15 minutes, even if it's just a tick, I did that today. And those are the metrics, because I found that the small conversations you have with your other people, those small conversations are the grease of the wheels for the bigger, larger conversations. And I think if you miss out on interaction and those small little coffee breaks, whatever, but they're like, hi, how are you? How's the family? How's the dog? Those kind of little conversations mean that the next time when you've got a difficult question, you're more likely to actually ask that difficult question rather than shy away. And going back to, most people like to do work they enjoy with people they like. And a lot of communication, or effective communication, happens between people who know each other quite well and like each other. Because if you're likable, people give you the benefit of the doubt. And the only way to be likable is to build trust, which takes time and it takes effort. So sometimes the most mundane of metrics, which is, are your people managers speaking to their team weekly, as a team or in individuals, and are your teams speaking to each other on a regular basis? Sometimes it's as simple as just marking that down. And that doesn't necessarily give you any magic number, but you can then monitor which team managers are maybe not meeting as regularly, and you will see the result. You will see it in other areas. Again, not as metrics, but you'll see perhaps that team isn't as effective or as efficient, and those kind of things. So I think sometimes it doesn't have to be complicated. It really doesn't have to be onerous. Again, to your point, really careful about the questions you ask, how you ask them, and what you're asking for. I think the why is hugely important. There's very much I'm doing this because I want to look good as a business owner or as a founder, and I'm doing this because I care about my people. And I think, and you've probably found this, the kind of two sides of that, I'm doing this because I care about my people, measure very different things, and I'm doing this to make myself look good. And I'm asking these questions so I can prove a point. Very different kinds of measurements. Communication is a challenge. It's like speed of responses. You can put sort of certain metrics like that. But often the best way to do it is do it at a team level, where the team comes together. Sometimes the team will decide what metrics and measurements they want to have to show that they're successful. And as a wider organization, then you kind of bubble those up. But culture comes heavily into that. It's like, what are you trying to achieve? What's the culture you want to build? Those things are where you need to really focus what you're measuring, and whether you need to measure it. I think on the very basic, why are you measuring it, and do you need to measure it? Or do you just need to kind of monitor and see and get a sense check of things? Do you really need a dashboard that tells you these kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to be measuring for the sake of measuring. We want to be measuring with the end goal in mind. And sometimes we may not know what that end goal is because we haven't looked at the data enough, but we want to be mindful that we want to keep our measurements both lean and intentional. We want to keep things simple. And that's something that's absolutely key for people operations. And that's something that's key from psychological point of view for people's mind. We don't want to make things too complicated. Sometimes when things are being made too complicated, this may be the sign not of progress, but of chaos in the mind of everyone involved, and in teams in particular. I'm guessing something that someone with your expertise, Jelaine, would be doing is actually coming into the teams and saying, let's make it as simple as possible. There is no need for complexity. That's what is really preventing you from generating that revenue, keeping your people happy. And from my point of view as a business psychologist, there's an important question of how safe people are feeling in the work environment. How well are they communicating when there is no clarity about responsibilities, about what everyone's doing, when there's too much going on on everyone's mind? That's not helpful for everyone. And right now, specifically with some people being at home, like homeschooling their kids while trying to work and having to worry about their health and financial situation and everything while working remotely, we need to make our processes, our systems, our relationships as simple as possible. Not simpler, but as simple as possible. And I guess, Jelaine, would be great to hear your thoughts on how can the business know what's the right amount of simple. I know we didn't script this question in.
Yeah.
I just sort of had it. I'm sort of putting you on the spot because I'd love to know the answer from someone with your expertise. So just throwing it out there and let's talk.
So one of the things, so I do a couple of things really that have worked really well when I've helped grow teams. One of which is a kind of culture. It's a cultural element, but it's kind of to coin Seth Godin, people like us do things like this. And culture basically is that. And so it's kind of a shorthand or heuristic for the staff where you say, we don't do these behaviors, and if we do, we call them out in this way. And you know, we all see the values written on the walls of all these businesses, and you know, honesty, integrity, all these fabulous words, but what does that mean in the behavior of people? What does that actually look like? For example, it's kind of shorthand of a sales team: go and make a sale no matter what. And you say that and you think flippantly that's fine, but to some people, no matter what is, we break the law, we go ahead, you know, all of those things. So you can say these flippant comments, but you haven't got the kind of check and balance on the other side of actually no matter what means you stop at this boundary. We don't break the law, you know, we don't go for wrong customers, but there's a positive and negative behavior that go with those values. And it's kind of like integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. And I constantly have that. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, just because there's no one here to see what I'm doing, I should still be truthful, honest, whatever that element is. And I think that's what you're trying to give your people. So I call them rules of engagement. It's like, what does our culture look like? What behavior does that manifest itself in? And what do we do if someone doesn't follow them? How do we call that out? Because a lot of people don't know how to stop bad behavior. And that's where you end up with kind of dysfunctional and sometimes often toxic work environments. It's because people don't feel comfortable saying, hang on a second, we don't do that here. So it's both the positive and the negative side of that. That gives people a shorthand and a little bit of freedom to say, within this boundary, I'm allowed to do what I feel is right because I've got these rules, I've got this boundary, I've got this cultural balance that makes me know what is good and what is bad. For an example, one of the statements that a business leader said to our wider team was, when you travel, imagine you are spending your own money. If you wouldn't stay in that hotel with your own money, you know, stay in a hotel that is fine. And it was always a really good rule. It meant that they trusted us not to make stupid decisions with business money, but it also was reasonable enough to say, if you are in a rat-infested hotel, you have the right to move, even if it's maybe a more expensive hotel in a more expensive city. And that rule, bear in mind, I was managing traveling engineers. That was basically what we had to do. That rule kept our travel budget perfectly reasonable for 5 years, up to 500 people. So that's a massive, you know, like just one small thing, the trust and faith that those leaders had in us to follow our own integrity and our own rules meant that we didn't have to put loads of policies and loads of kind of onerous things in place. So that's simple. It's like simple statements. You can do this until you get to this point and then come and speak to me. So it's kind of boundaries. And again, boundaries come from trust. So when someone starts, you give them a paving slab and they have so many rules they have to fit. But as they build trust and knowledge and awareness and training, soon you've given them a whole field with a fence and they know where they fit, what they can do within that. But at the point they meet the edges, they know where to go to kind of ask the question. So they're kind of, I call them rules of engagement. And they're simple, you know, and they don't have to be massive policies, they don't have to be massive documents until if none of these rules apply, go and speak to a manager. It's perfectly reasonable that then that question then gets asked, okay, what do we do when we deal with this? But it gives your team quite a lot of freedom to operate to their best ability within the constraints of the business, and you've got loose rules that people can follow. So that I think is massive, is having the culture documented or formalized in a much more behavioral way than just we're truthful, we're honest, you know, we're fun, we learn a lot, all these lovely things that the businesses define themselves, but actually putting that into behavioral rules of people like us do things like this.
Yeah, and then making sure that that's actually being lived by everyone in the organization.
Yeah.
And I guess
and
my
safety, I'm just thinking back again to your safety element, is if they break the rules or if it fails, they feel comfortable coming and saying, this hasn't worked, I've done this wrong, I feel safe telling you that. And safety is a huge, safety and trust is massive with people. You get so much more if it's mutual. But I think one of the statements that really resonated with me when we were talking first was that feeling safe. You know, human psychology is very basic. It's about feeling safe. How do you build a business where your employees just feel safe? It will absolutely reap rewards.
Yeah, and Ghislaine, I really love the quote that you remind us of, that definition of integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's watching. When there is that safe environment, people feel that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay not to be at their best. It's okay to be learning as they go. That's what a real learning culture is. That's what a real high-performing culture is. When there are opportunities for learning, when one feels safe enough that they can focus on their performance and creativity instead of worrying about the politics and what someone will say and all of those things that are really unproductive and should have really as little place as possible in the modern workplace. And on the subject of that, now we want to be measuring effectively how are those behaviors being played out day to day. Do people feel that's actually the case? Now, of course, we want to have a trusting, safe environment in the organizations. But the thing is that for that environment to happen, we need time and we need constant proof that it's actually safe. My colleagues are actually trustworthy. And for that to be the case, we need to be measuring, making sure that those measurements are anonymous or if we're doing, say, focus groups, that's in a safe environment and that's clear for everyone, to make sure that we're gathering feedback and then acting on that feedback effectively in meaningful ways, so that those behaviors are actually ingrained and the sense of safety and trust in the business lives on, develops, and really becomes part of the culture, not just on the paper, on the screen, but indeed in people's hearts.
Totally. And I think coming back again to some of the things that, again, I look at and go, how the hell do you measure it? But there is that, sometimes it is simple when you're doing the engagement surveys and those kind of things. Do you feel safe? Do you trust your colleagues? You know, they're very simple statements that you can say yes or no. And that gives you a measurement. And there, do you feel trusted? Do you trust your leaders? You know, it's those kind of things. But trust does take time. But that safety is key. And I still sometimes just go, how the hell do you measure it? But you often, you can walk into a meeting or a group and go, yeah, just the way they're speaking to each other, sometimes even just having a conflict, but in a way that is respectful. You just go, you know, there's a lot of psychological safety. And I think in current business where people feel like it's fine to hire and fire at will and all of these kind of horrible practices, your business is so much better if you've got people that just work alongside each other very well and trust each other. It will come back in spades with revenue, whatever other, you know, major success markers you're using. But yeah, I don't know how you navigate the actual measuring some of these things that I know you do so well, and getting the questions just right. You know, what questions do you find when you're looking at safety? What do you tend to ask to get those measurements?
You know, you mentioned the question, I trust my colleagues. That's a good service statement. You can, I feel that this is a safe working environment. Another, it's simple, it makes sense. Now, some people need different levels of trust. Some people would define trust and safety differently because we all have different thresholds. But in the end of the day, we know when we'll feel trust, or we know when we feel safe through the opposite, because we know when the opposite is true and we don't feel trust and we don't feel safety. And just asking that simple question, it makes sense for everyone, whichever their definition and preference for replying that is. And when you ask that, you can see, do people agree or strongly agree? Do they disagree? Oh, we're really onto something. We need to understand what's happening there. Do people say that they neither agree nor disagree? What's happening in there? Maybe they've just joined the company. Maybe they've joined at the time during lockdown and they haven't had the chance to experience office culture and don't feel that connected. Let's understand that a little bit better. Maybe that's something related to their gender, their race, their sexual orientation, their age. Is that affecting? We need to understand that for people's survey, and then probe for more information in a gentle way, understand what's actually happening here. Let's talk about it. And then it's really important to make sure that managers know how to have those conversations.
Absolutely.
We are not measuring for the sake of measuring. We're measuring to take meaningful action. If there's something that's particularly concerning, do the managers, do business leaders know how to have a conversation about it? Okay, what's going on in here? Let's talk about it. Maybe they don't feel safe talking to their manager. Do they have some sort of champion in the organization to talk about things that they may not be feeling safe about? Or is there something else to create a trust? Have those conversations. It's not about gathering the data, it's about taking meaningful action based on the quality data that you gather. And I would say that's like one of the basic takeaways we need to keep in mind with people analytics.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. Meaningful action. Yeah, it's key. And I think that's the thing is, again, with some of these words, again, intangibles, people's perception of these words is different. But as long as you can capture the words and what they define that feeling to be is there, it makes a massive difference. So yeah, it's, as I say, I don't envy how you navigate some of the other elements of engagement, and yeah, there's the magic there of getting just the right data in the way that you can then create the action. So yeah, I'm in awe always.
Absolutely. So Gillian, I'd love to hear what, like, for the operations leaders, for people leaders, for everyone listening to us, what would be your main sort of like universal truths, wisdoms, takeaways for making sure that they have this alignment between their operations, systems, processes, day-to-day, and their culture?
So I think the main thing, and this goes from sort of the hiring process and to some degree where you have an intentional culture. So I think a culture in a business is there whether you like it or not, and you can intentionally have it or you can just let it form. And so this kind of tends towards those that have an intentional culture where they sort of document their values and their behaviors and things like that. So through their recruitment, they say, you know, we're a learning company, we, you know, have honesty, all of those kind of things. But the main thing that I really focus on, like my universal truth is it's called the platinum rule, and it's like treat people as they wish to be treated. And the only way you can do that is by asking them. And so a lot of the work I do, but a lot of the things I see is people don't actually know how to work together, because there's not a document that says this person works this way and that person works that way. And I've got what I call a user manual, which tells everyone, this is how I work, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is how I communicate, this is how to get the best from me. And what it does is it takes all the personal stuff. I can be a very annoying person. And so and I speak my mind, and I can be honest to the point of tactlessness, and I've got a lot of sarcasm. And so if I feel comfortable with someone, I immediately go default to kind of, you know, having a laugh, being sarcastic. And some people find that really offensive. And so what's easier is to say, that's just me. It's not because I'm finding you difficult or challenging. It's just like, this is how I am. And so what I do is I say to anyone, is like, you need to ask people how they want to be treated. And people management is never about you managing everybody the same way. You are not the people manager you want. You have to turn up for each person how they want. And the only way you can do that is by asking them. So the best people managers I've had have turned around to me and said, okay, what do you need from me? What do you want from me? How do I deliver this? How do I deliver that? And the most profound thing I've ever done with when I was early entry-level people manager was, and I don't even know where I got the idea from, but I went around my team and said, you know, if I want to interact with you, how should I do it? What gets the best from you? What do you prefer? Because I'm very much I don't like telephones, all of that stuff. But some people like the conversation, hi, how are you? All of that sort of stuff before they even get into anything else. And so I learned that I need to learn what my people needed, and I would interact with them that way. And so that's the first thing, is if you know what people want, they may not get everything they want, but at least you can then say, because of the situation that we work in, or however we are, I can give you 80% of what you want, but this 20% you've got to compromise on. But they know where they're compromising, and it makes a massive difference. And it was just delivering messages in a way that the person likes messages delivered, cuts out so much noise. So my kind of universal truth of platinum rule, treat people as they wish to be treated, which means you have to ask them and have that conversation. If you do that with all your team members, you'll see a massive difference. And the culture will then be, rather than someone picking up the phone going, what? Because they hate the phone, you message them or you email them, and you don't have that sort of friction, because you've given them a message or communicated with them in a way that they prefer and that they want to receive. And I just find, I mean, you can find it on the web, you know, building your own user manual. I have it, I share it with everyone. And it means people know how to interact with me and know what kind of response they're going to get. And it just gives them a little bit of comfort. And you filter that up. Working styles, you can do it for so many different ways. But if you can build a team where most people are getting 80% of how they want to interact with each other, and your systems and your processes accommodate those, most people are working in a way that they love. And that friction gets reduced even more. And then they get to know each other and they play on their work practices. But if you've got a team coming together very quickly and need to be producing very quickly, having that kind of first level of get to know me by just reading a document, it's massive. And you can then, I do it as a recruitment. So when I'm helping hire, when you get to the final stages of the shortlist, I ask you to write your own user manual based on the team that you're joining. And I say, can you write your own? And you see this thread of culture, you see this thread of value similarity, all of that run through each user manual of a team. It's actually really amazing where you can pull out threads of, wow, you've all got that in common. Oh, you all work in that way. And people know that they're coming into a team that will fit. And you can see it, go, that person's going to fit right in because they work this way. And yeah, as I say, it's profound. Simple, maybe not easy. People find it real struggle to reflect on themselves and write about themselves. But once they've done it, it is amazing. Then they go, oh, that's why that happens whenever I do that. Oh, that's what it is. Makes it's magic.
And I hear you, Gillian. It's so important to make sure that everyone knows what are the preferences, what are the strengths and development opportunities, what are the boundaries for different people to function well as a team and by extension as an organization. I've actually just finished a series of workshops with quickly growing scale up, and it was like a series of trainings for their measurement, for their managers. And something that we were looking at in big detail is the psychology of communication and an understanding how can they use the basic coaching skills, how can they effectively onboard people in virtual environment, how can they give feedback, how can they understand what are the personal preferences for every person, and make sure that they take those into consideration in their one-on-ones, in their performance conversations, while also making sure that that's aligned with company culture, direction, what sort of work they actually need to be doing. There's a lot of psychology. There is a lot of it's a science and it's an art.
Yes.
But that's so important to get right, to create that culture where people can actually feel safe and can communicate effectively. And I think that's in my opinion, that's really the future of workforce, making sure that managers and business leaders have those coaching skills and this emotional intelligence to appreciate those differences, while also combining that with the business sense to make sure that they do it to an extent that's helping them do really right by their people, create an amazing culture, while also driving the business forward.
That's it, exactly. And that's important. It's the driving the business forward, and all those people helping you drive it. You know, that team is part of your success, and it's massive when you get it right. And there are a few companies out there where absolutely shining on those elements. But it's science and an art.
Absolutely, yeah. And Gillian, it's so great having this conversation with you. As always, pleasure to hear about your experience, to bounce ideas, to really see how much we're aligned about this importance when it comes of making sure that business is driven by people with people in mind. And can you please tell us how can people get in touch with you, how they can find out more about all the great work that you do?
You can type in Elaine Chan into a search engine. I am the only one, so that helps. You can Google bomb me, if that's such a thing anymore. So you can get hold of me at Elaine@brilliantandhuman.com, and or our website, brilliantandhuman.com, and on LinkedIn. Again, if you put in Elaine Chan in there, you get me. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Pavel. I've really loved chatting to you, and obviously the conversations we've had that have led up to this point as well. Always very interesting, and your feedback and expertise and experience is fascinating.
Thank you, Gillian. And as for me, I can be reached on LinkedIn. Type my name, Pavel 𝗏𝗀. As far as I know, I'm also the only person with this spelling of the name. Gillian, we understand there are some challenges, but there are some pluses of having a difficult to pronounce, difficult to spell name. And I can also be reached through my email, pavel@businesspurposecoaching.com. And everyone, thanks so much for listening in, for joining us today. And Gillian, thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.